Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Venus Rose Chat. I'm April from The Moon is My Calendar, and I'm here with Bronwyn from the Esoteric Zodiac.
Hi.
Hi. So, in this Venus Rose Chat, we'll share a little bit from the article that Bronwyn just published in the Esoteric Zodiac about the elemental Venus. And I'll read a little bit I loved reading this article, so I actually read some of it out loud from the description of Venus in Pisces. So Bronwyn wrote this while Venus was still in Pisces in that very dreamy quality. And then we'll share a little bit about an article I just published about the petals of Venus and more of the inner workings of the cycle and some of the creative process that went into creating this article. You're also invited to join us. We're going to have a Venus Rose Masterclass Monday, February 17th. It is free for all of our paid subscribers, so you're welcome to become a paid subscriber, or you can register to join us for the Masterclass. So I hope you enjoy this conversation between Bronwyn and I about the Venus Rose cycle, about Venus through the signs, creative practice, the Venus star points, Aries retrograde, all the things. I'm so glad that you're here. So let's dive in.
I have a lot of planets in Taurus, so I'm very tactile and very sense-oriented. And my idea was to put you in the room with each of these Venuses. Not like, what is this personality? Although I am describing characters to some degree. Yeah. But what's the vibe?
I'm wondering, I would love to read the entry for Venus in Pisces.
Oh,
I have it pulled up. So this is from your article of the elemental Venus on the Esoteric Zodiac Substack. So yeah, spending time with Venus in Pisces is an exalted, poetic mystic, known for her vintage silk gowns, her signature fragrance of water lily, and I actually don't know what that is. Ambergris.
Ambergris. I'll explain it after you finish reading.
Okay. She is your strong dancer's body that moves through the world with grace and confidence. Venus in Pisces sits in her sea green bed and reads you poems. She wants you to float in and out on the tides of your creative dreams. I love that. Venus in Pisces is a dancer with big, expressive eyes. She wants you to lose yourself in love and art. She wants you to get high and sit on the floor of your painting studio just dreaming. She wants you to keep a dream journal that's painted and collaged. She is a seer. She wants you to swing over the chasm in the earth and spill prophecy. She wants you to weep in the rain. She wants you to take a retreat to a beautiful island or maybe live there forever. She wants you to depend on each other. She wants your art to inspire acts of compassion.
Thank you for reading that. Ambergris is like the stuff that washes up on the beach that's like a remnant of whale sperm. And it used to be, it makes you think of the foam of Aphrodite, right?
Yes.
And it used to be a major component in a lot of perfumes. Now, of course, we use synthetic ambergris, but it used to be like the base animalic note in a lot of perfume.
Wow.
It's a historic perfume ingredient. Yeah, and something that I think you can still find washed up on the beach, but you might not know what it is. And yeah, it just makes me think of the foam-born Aphrodite, because that's the story of her conception, right? As she came out of it's kind of grisly and gruesome, but she does come out of the foam sperm of the sea. I live in a place where there's herring spawn. Actually, they're going to be spawning soon, usually in March. And the sea turns deep turquoise green and all of this foam washes up on the beach. And I have to think that there's something in that Venus myth of her coming to the shore, born on foam in this deep turquoise sea. That's a remnant of some kind of spawning that was important in the Mediterranean. I don't know. We'd have to look. Like, the fish are depleted, right? So we don't have always those historic annual effusions. But yeah, just think it's a beautiful example of how a lot of this kind of poetic stuff comes down to our ancestral memory and the things that are tied to our subsistence, and um, that were such important moments in the natural world that helped us to continue to live and thrive.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of a marker of a kind of either a seasonal turning,
Yeah,
some kind of connection to the story of the stars that is a
yeah,
reminder of the lived experience.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So much of the stuff that we've sort of mystified and made entirely sacred and mystical, which it is, also has roots in very practical timekeeping and markers of important moments in the agricultural or hunting, fishing calendars.
Yeah.
It's beautiful to think about that because it's both practical and mystical.
Yeah.
So when we're tracking planetary cycles, we start with, we both encourage people to start with the moon because she's right there. And her cycle, although it fluctuates a lot, is so dependable and relatively easy to track. When it comes to Venus, her cycle is so beautiful, but it's really complex. And it can be over complexified by a lot of the stuff that we read about that cycle. Either it's over mystified or it's sort of over scienced.
Yeah.
And the piece that you have recently been working on that you just published on your Substack is, I feel like I've looked at a lot of literature about the Venus cycle, and the way that you bring this out, and for people who are both experienced with it or maybe brand new to tracking Venus, is just so beautiful, clear, accessible, bringing the science and the art. And it's going to go on to my bibliography of things that I recommend to all my
Mm.
students around planetary cycles. So I felt like it was a real contribution to the literature about the Venus cycle. And do you want to share a little bit of what went into that process?
Yeah. I I would say probably the last 8 years. So whole Venus rose, um, which the article is the petals of Venus. So
Mm.
how the orbit and the configuration, really, the dance of the sun and the moon, not the moon, the sun. I mean, the moon's in there, but Earth and Venus, those three
Yeah.
create this pattern in the sky. When I heard that, I wanted to understand it like fully, fully in an embodied way. And it was just like you said, if I read a bunch of things written from a scientific, astronomical perspective, it just didn't resonate in a way that made sense. I wanted to picture it and draw it. And so over the last 8 years, that's kind of what I've been doing. And I got to a point where I realized like I was still learning, but I knew enough to share about the journey and kind of be on the journey together. So this article that I wrote came from notes from classes and courses that I was teaching during Venus retrograde times. And so I had some bullets, and then I had to kind of remember every time Venus goes retrograde, there's like a refreshing and a remembering and a reconnecting as Venus comes closest to Earth at that retrograde time. It's like, for me, feels like this homecoming. And it's really the time that I connect back in with this cycle, probably the strongest. So I went back and I opened all my notes and I was like, you know what, even just for myself, I want to compile this in one place, not the 10 different slideshows and handout, all these things. And so that's what this article is. There's so much that I left out, and I love that process of distilling,
Mm.
of finding like the most what's it is, there's a complexity to it. Even when I was trying to understand early on, how is it that Venus could be a morning star and an evening star? And actually, how is it that those times sync up in this way that each lasts for about 9 months, like a gestational cycle of morning star, evening star? And so I was like, there's really what's the inner workings? And I think just in my own curiosity of wanting to map out for myself what that pattern was like of her orbit, then then I opened up so many doors for so, there's the mythological part of it, there's the astrological part of it, there's just the um it's almost like the architecture of the cycle,
Mhm.
these points in the sky, and that was the other part of like the Venus, the points where there's a conjunction with the sun. Um, and then the self-study and the tracking to go along with that, to have enough time built up to then see repetitions of patterns of
Yeah.
when a retrograde is in a particular sign, or even with Venus at the far side, the superior conjunction, and just taking note of things. I will say there is um, an episode, Bronwyn, I don't know if you listened to it, the astrology podcast has a 7.5 hour episode. This is all time, seems like an all-time record.
I don't know. I think that's probably not the record, but yeah, he's infamous for those 8 hour.
A marathon. Actually, just looking at historically the last 100 years
Yeah.
of this cycle repetition of Venus in retrograding in Aries and the things that come up. And with all of that, it has taken me this long to actually realize that I was conceived on that repetition of this Venus and Aries cycle in 1977. So those little connections that we can make with the planet, with the cycles, and our own personal lives, I feel like is this, it feels like it opens those channels of communication.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, the weaving together of self-study through reflection back. Um, I just put a little post on my Substack the other day with the years, the last, I think, 4 or 5 iterations, the years of the Venus and Aries retrograde. What was the big story that was going on for you that has a common thread
Mhm.
through these 5 springs that are separated by 8 years? And those invitations do tend to spark real aha moments for people because we will find that there's a common thread in the story that repeats. The story might look really different from one 8 year period to the next, but there's something there. And it's always worthwhile to do those excavations into the self and see, because she does take us through a transformation with those retrograde periods.
Mhm.
And you so seamlessly brought together the science, the self-study, and the art of it. And I wonder if do you have something handy? Do you have something from your archives, beautiful Venusian artwork that you
Oh
took
my.
to show?
Well, this is my folder, right? Like my manila folder, but it's the outer like recycled calendar. This kind of like imagining of the star, the pentagram, and these points. Um, and actually what I realize now is like this star should be turned because the inner point and the outer points of the conjunctions um are in the
Right.
same sign, so they actually are in the same
They
part of
match
the
up.
sky.
Yeah.
But I like this building
But
of
it's
the road.
exploratory, right? You figure that out by putting your hand to paper. It's like you do this in workshops, and I think it just like talk about aha moments. It really is so helpful when you embody that for people. Oh, I love it.
I mean, these are my just like doodle type things of the inner, the outer, and the layered petals. And I think that's the part that really struck me was like, oh, this is the legacy of love. And
Yeah.
how has the legacy of love played out in our lives
Yeah.
in accordance possibly with the Venus cycle and retrogrades? And so how those build on each other and these petals then that create roses that can create a bouquet or create the garden. And so when we tune into the cycle of Venus, we can start to, like you were saying, follow that storyline and tell the story, like almost have Venus tell the story back to us as that mirror. Um,
There's something so powerful about understanding the cycle by just putting your hands to paper and creating the shapes of it. I don't know what it is, but it really is a powerful way to, I mean, we can look at those beautiful art, the beautiful art play that you've shared with us, but for us to get our own hands on it,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that just helps the brain to understand it and embody it.
Yeah.
And especially with something as complex as the Venus cycle. Um, I love this framing. How has the legacy of love played out in our lives? And I think keeping that in our minds as we're looking back at those annual or every 8-year repetitions really helps to pull out what's most significant
Mm.
and maybe what it is that needs to be renewed this time around.
Yeah.
Because that's why we do the retrodiction, right? So that we can have some help navigating the present and know what's most important and how it might. It's not just about knowing what might happen,
Mm-hmm.
but for that advice from our past self on how to get through the challenges of the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a checking in. I feel like there's this checking in with the heart and a checking in of like, when is that feeling of being in the Venus frequency that there's a particular mood, and a particular way of being with Venus, that is so overflowing with abundance, that is so like the garden is blooming and the bees are buzzing and there's enough honey for everybody and like being in that Venus frequency vibration, um, to even check in of like, am I living from that place or do I feel all dried up, like burnt
Yeah.
out? Uh,
Yeah.
and how welcoming Venus back in reminds us of, possibly, what feels like might be missing, of being reminded, oh, when I read all of the elemental Venus and reading through all of those, like it evoked such feelings of those Venus, like how those Venuses are and can be embodied,
Yeah.
as a reminder, because it's not, you know, in popular culture, the way that what would maybe be seen as Venus, can sometimes feel just surface or somehow like somebody else, like a movie star gets to be like that, but not,
Yeah.
in our own individual way. Um, So yeah, I'm excited. You and I are going to have a masterclass for the Venus Rose, uh,
Yeah.
in this bringing together of what you shared with the elemental Venus and looking at our personal Venus, our birth Venus, our natal Venus, and the Venus, archetype energy, elemental embodiment of Venus in Aries that we're presently,
Yeah.
um, yeah, Venus in Aries. I'm just going to say we'll put the link to the article so everybody can like
Yeah.
read each one and really tap into like all the different faces and, energies of each of them. And then also in the Venus Masterclass, it really is for people who have maybe even experience and understanding of Venus, but want to really embody, and from a lived experience way, not like an out there kind of, um, there's nothing wrong with like the intellectual way of understanding something. But I also have an Earth Venus. And so
Yeah.
it's like if it's not like if I can't locate it in the body and actually feel that, just thinking something will go in and out and I don't feel like there's a grasp. So, I'll be leading a meditation and really like the experience and the feeling of a morning star and evening star and
Mm.
how that movement, like how to anchor that and that feeling in the body, and then how to access it in times where we need maybe more of a certain kind of energy is called for.
Yeah.
Um,
And you'll help us get paint on our hands, right?
yeah,
And do some of that creative play like what you've shown us.
Yeah. And what I'm thinking I'm just, in that poetry of each of the signs of that invitation you've brought us into the elemental Venus aspect. Like if it just made me like inspired me to want to write from that voice of, for me,
Yes.
like Venus and Capricorn, like that expression. Um,
Yeah, maybe we can do some journaling play that feels like that. Uh,
mhm.
and yeah, I would love to incorporate that into the elemental Venus part of the workshop. And I'm also going to help people to understand how to use their elemental Venus as a way to pinpoint the kind of really juicy Venusian times in their own calendar. Uh, Combining this with some of the work that I've been doing in this small cohort learning with Drew Levanti about electional astrology from a really literally radical perspective from the perspective of the radix, i.e., the natal chart. So
Mm.
happy to weave some of that wisdom in as well to help you make your day to day more Venusian and bring more of that Venus juice wherever she's working from to
Mm.
bring more of that into your life. Because that's it with the Venus retrograde, right? There's the myth of Inanna and really all of those myths of the goddess's descent into the underworld are ultimately about those times in our life when part of ourselves turns her back on another part of ourselves
Mm.
in order to achieve something, in order to align with the outer world, and uh, more vulnerable but extremely fertile and creative part of the self gets abandoned. And the reunion of those two parts isn't always like a happy party with rose petals on the ground.
Mm.
It's certainly not how it happens in the myth. And we walk through this psychologically with every Venus retrograde. What does it really feel like to turn back towards that abandoned, fertile part of yourself and embrace her, even though she may not want you to embrace her? And we work through that psychologically with every retrograde. So potentially we're returning whole with more access to those deeply creative parts of the self, and so more ability to create that Venusian utopia in our own day to day. Yeah, so we're gonna have fun on Monday. This is Monday, the what is 14, 15, 16,
17th, yeah.
17th. Oh, I think I've been saying the 16th, but it's the 17th. That's my Saturn in Pisces, always confused about time. Monday, the 17th, day of the moon. This is free for our paid subscribers. So if you're a paid subscriber either to the Esoteric Zodiac or to the Moon is My Calendar, that's the name of your Substack too, right? The Moon is My Calendar?
It's interesting. I have it set as both you could put in the moon as my calendar or for the name of the podcast, Between the Moon.
Between the
I
Moon.
think yeah, and that's what I have as official, like Between the Moon, because it hosts the podcast, but it also is the articles and all of the surrounding uh material.
Yeah. Of
Hmm.
course, we think you should be a paid subscriber on both of those Substacks.
Yes.
We have a lot of fun. It's what do they say? Like the price of a cup of coffee um a month. And you get this masterclass free. But if you don't want to do that, you can still join us for the masterclass. And we're posting all the information below the video. Is there anything else that we or Venus want to say before we close?
Mm. I think the unfolding to really actually see our own unfolding and see that through the lens of Venus is an opportunity. Um, and people talk about rose-colored glasses as like a bad thing. But to actually have experiences in our life when we bring in Venus to see through like what is unfolding here. How is my heart present? How am I listening? Like that is part of the beauty and the power because it's how we're living our lives.
Yeah.
Showing up in a time that would rather like squash all things beautiful and artistic expression and all the diversity of forms. Um,
Mm,
and and the connections and the relationships both to ourselves through that self-love, and also in that mutual flourishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, more of this. Okay, well, we hope that you will join us, and we'll put all the information in the links below.
Great. We'll see you Monday.
Yay.